Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Williams and I'm doing my presentation on international adoption, and I chose to do more of a literature review rather than a research proposal just because I wanted to find out as much as I could about international adoption. So what I'm doing is just kind of talking about everything that I could find out basically. Why is this research important? It's something that is becoming more and more popular. More people are either advocating for international adoption or doing it themselves. More people in the United States are adopting internationally than domestically. So that's another interesting trend going on that makes you wonder, why is this happening? And it's also controversial. It's controversial because a lot of people feel that when you take the culture aspect out of that child's life, it really hurts them. So the more we can learn about this, the better off the adoptee is going to be, in theory. So, there's a lot of talk about openness in the international adoptions and how this either makes the adoption process better or worse for the adoptee. It can be a lot of different things actually. It can be letters between the birth family and the adoptee, pictures, scheduled visits, phone calls, and even allowing the adoptee to access their birth records, to know the names of their birth parents, just really any amount of openness that the adoptee can have about their past is quote-unquote an open adoption. Perceived benefits of international adoption: for the adoptee, they gain a lot of self-knowledge in relation to their culture. They have higher satisfaction with their adoption overall, and they have a greater understanding about adoption in general, like what it means, everything. Birth families, they have less unresolved grievances. Adoptive parents, more satisfaction with the adoption, and they have more empathy towards the adoptee and the birth parents, and less fear that the adoptee will one day abandon them. And the fear part is, from what I've found during my research, seems to be a really big deal for the adoptive parents. It seems like a really common thing to be worried about, so if having an open adoption alleviates some of that, that's pretty awesome. So popularity of international adoptions are increasing, while the rate of international adoptions is decreasing. The United States is adopting more internationally than we are domestically, but it's not because, they see our children as, what's wrong with them? Why are they being put up for adoption? International adoption, I guess they see themselves as saving a child from poverty or something. Like, it seems more of like a valiant thing to do, I guess. That is probably the wrong word for it. But the rate of international adoptions is actually going down, not because there isn't enough adoptable children, but because of strict regulations put forth by the Hague Convention, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and from parents there's a lot of rights restrictions, especially in China and South Korea, that are preventing prospective adoptive parents from adopting from other countries. So the Hague Convention was signed by the United States in 1994, but it was not implemented in the United States until 2008. It's basically a guidebook for adoption agencies to have the best adoption process available. The main goal of The Hague is to prevent human trafficking. More protections for the children are offered under those countries who abide by the Hague Convention. and adoption agencies working under The Hague must be accredited. Each child must receive an adoption certificate and must be eligible for a visa. You can still adopt children who are not, or whose country is not under the Hague Convention. It's just more difficult to do so. So which countries are open to international adoption? There's actually a lot. Accepting children from other countries is the United States, Canada, Holland, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and Ireland. The countries mostly adopting out children is obviously a lot more than the countries that are taking in children. I'm not going to read the whole list. I'll just let you all look at that for a second. Okay, so while we're still talking about openness or international adoption, which countries are open to it, I should say, Canada is having some issues fully accepting the Hague Convention. They accept the whole thing except for Article 21, which states that basically when a child is adopted internationally, their birth country's rights they kind of go away. The birth country has no rights to that child anymore. So by not accepting this rule, Canada is basically, they're doing it out of respect for the birth country and trying to preserve cultures if they need to. So basically, if they internationally adopt a child and the birth culture decides that they need that child back, Canada basically has to give it to them. There's nothing they can do. China has very unique restrictions on international adoptive parents. Them and South Korea are actually trying to kind of phase out international adoption just because they're having a surge in nationalism, and especially since China is becoming more independent, they're getting more money for themselves. They don't have the one baby law anymore. They can have more than one child. So that's something that they're trying to phase out international adoption and take care of their own children. Some of the restrictions that China has against international adoptive parents are that if there's a single woman who is trying to adopt a baby from China, they can only do so after they sign a waiver stating that they're not homosexual. And at this point, they can adopt a child, but they are only allowed to adopt children with special needs. Those who have schizophrenia or are blind cannot adopt at all. People who are morbidly obese, have facial deformities, and people who have taken antidepressants in the last 2 years also cannot adopt. Anyone with a mental illness, pretty much they don't want adopting from China. South Korea, I didn't really get to hear what kind of restrictions they have, but they are also trying to phase out international adoptions due to their growing sense of nationalism. So why are some countries against international adoption is the next thing that we're going to cover. Some countries that are completely closed, again, you can see it on the PowerPoint, but Russia, Vietnam, Guatemala, Rwanda, and Haiti, Montenegro, stuff like that. Ghana and Kazakhstan have not yet completely closed their doors, but they are currently suspended because they cannot meet the requirements of the Hague Convention, although they are trying to. So in the eyes of the Hague Convention, they are suspended. Let's see. Ghana is actually kind of doing the same thing China is doing, where they're just having some really strange restrictions on those people who are trying to internationally adopt. People who are trying to internationally adopt from Ghana have to live in Ghana for 3 months in order to adopt a child. That's just the prerequisite to adopting a child out of Ghana. You have to live there for 3 months. and that makes it really difficult for adoptive parents because they can't just pack up and leave for 3 months, and getting there and going back and adopting the child, all of that is going to be so expensive in itself, so it's making it really difficult. We'll go back to this. The role of culture I already kind of talked about. Canada obviously feels like it's very important if they are not going to sign a part of the convention that says, hey, once the child is adopted, their culture doesn't really have any say in what they do anymore. So to have enough respect for that to say, I'm not going to sign this because the culture is that important is a big deal. Corruption in the adoption process. There is a lot of human trafficking going on, especially in India. Children are being taken from their front porches or from the inside of their homes while their parents are at work and being sold to, well, this is kind of getting into the human trafficking too, but once these children are stolen from their homes, they are being sold to these orphanages who are then making a huge profit selling them to international adoptive parents who are adopting them into other states. Pride and nationalism, like we've talked about China and South Korea, how they're growing, they're becoming more independent on themselves, their country is getting more money, so as a result of that, they're trying to keep all of their children within their own country and take care of their own, basically. Political strike back. This actually was found with Russia, who banned international adoptions with the United States. This was kind of a weird thing that Vladimir Putin kind of said. He didn't say that international adoptions were being shut down to strike back at the United States for a law that they passed that basically United States law enforcement is allowed to punish Russian citizens if they're in the United States and they have done something wrong. So, well, Russian citizens who have violated human rights in the United States. And basically what he said about it was, yes, other countries are better than ours. Should we just ship all of our children there and then move there ourselves too? So he kind of had a sarcastic way to go about it that didn't point to the whole politics, but that's right after that law was passed in the United States, that's when international adoptions came to a halt with the United States. So if that's not what it is, it's a very strange coincidence. The Hague Convention, like we've already talked about, is more of a guidebook. It has really good intentions, but a lot of its rules are very strict and a lot of countries cannot meet up to them. Every adoption agency or The Hague must be accredited, and they must have a person who is appointed to look over everything. And for some countries that is just not available. There's just no way for them to do that right now. So it's not that they don't want to be a part of it, it's just they are not able to right now. They don't have the finances, they don't have the government structure to be able to do that right now. So, we're going to move on to the last question. How likely are adoptees to seek out their birth families? To answer questions about themselves and lack of openness in the adoption are first two that I'd like to talk about. To answer questions about themselves, this can be like biological, like where do I get my eyes from, the color of my hair, just simple stuff like that. Lack of openness in the adoption. Things that we have talked about in class before is how adoptees, when there is no open adoption, may tend to fantasize or romanticize about their birth parents and think that they're going to one day rescue them, and that's not really the case. And if the adoptee has interacted with their adoptive parent or their biological parents before, and that kind of eliminates the whole mystery to it. They've met them before, they talk to them, maybe even on a regular basis, who knows. That just kind of eliminates the whole fantasy that they may have about their birth parents, sorry. Openness in adoption it's actually turned out to be a really big deal. Openness can help the adoptee make an informed decision on whether or not to repatriate. That means go back to their own country once they are an adult. If the adoptee has already been incorporated with their country that they were born in, and they grow up and decide, hey, I like visiting there, but it's not for me, I don't want to live there, then they can make an informed decision on that, because they know they've experienced it, they've been a part of it for a while, so they know what being a part of that country will mean. In an open adoption, the adoptee may already be in contact with the birth family, which I talked about on the last slide, eliminates any mystery or fantasies that they might have. Adoptees have a better sense of themselves when they're knowledgeable about their birth family and culture. It helps for them to know where they come from, understandably. I mean, any of us would want to know where we come from. So, but it helps for like medical reasons too. If there's something wrong genetically with the child, it helps to know where it came from. So there's that. And if they have any genetic dispositions to anything, like alcoholism, maybe they should be aware of that so they can avoid alcohol. Just stuff like that. So they also seek out their birth families as a part of their natural development to answer medical questions that they may have about themselves, and as a coping mechanism for the adoptee, and finding the birth family may be extremely difficult or even impossible. That last one is more of an influence that might either hinder them or just completely stop them from seeking out their birth families, or it definitely affects their likelihood. So part of their natural development, I've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but just as they grow up, it's natural to want to know where they come from. To answer medical questions about themselves, that's kind of something we've already talked about too, like genetics. It can be anything from where I get my eye color from to, I don't know, like psychopathologies, like do I have a genetic disposition to be schizophrenic or depressed or anything like that. And stuff like that's really important to know. Searching as a coping mechanism for the adoptee. So that could be if a woman has been adopted, if she is an international adoptee, and she goes into adulthood and gets pregnant, then that may be really hard for her to deal with, because that will put her on a different level with her birth parents. Even if she's never met them, there will be a new level of understanding. It's a big life change too, and it may lead to a lot of questions, and may lead that person to want to seek out their birth parents. Also, the loss of one or both of the adoptive parents is a huge deal and a big life-changing event, and may also lead the adoptee to search for their birth parents. And finding the birth family may be extremely difficult or even impossible. This keeps a lot of adoptees from actually searching out their birth parents, even though they may want to. They may be curious, but they won't do it. Consequences of seeking out birth families. I'm running out of time, so I have to go pretty quick. Feelings of isolation when the adoptee reunites with birth family. Language barriers, cultural conflicts, rejection by the birth family. All of these would be totally devastating. And language barriers, I think, is something that should be accounted for before the adoptee goes over to find their families. But rejection would just be devastating. I can't even imagine. Tiemann actually concluded in his study that only 31.6% of adoptees were actively seeking out their birth families. They estimated 40 to 50% would actually seek them out, and found that a lot less did. They also found that another 32% were interested in out and learning more about their origin, but were not actively doing so. So which international adoptees are seeking out their birth families? Those who have psychiatric and behavioral problems, which can be seen as early as childhood, those with lower self-esteem, those who don't have a strong relationship with their adoptive family, and women, for the reasons we talked about earlier. So, conclusions. International adoptions are more and more popular, even though international adoptions are becoming less and less frequent. With popularity growing, it is important to understand which countries are open, closed, or suspended, as well as the reasons behind their status. International adoption is when adoptive parents choose to adopt a child from a different country than their own. International adoption gained popularity after the Vietnam War ended in 1975. The United States, the Netherlands, and Canada are adopting more and more international children. Developments in technology have led to more open international adoptions. The Hague Convention's main goal is to prevent human trafficking of adoptees, and the number of countries open to international adoption are 3 times more than those who are completely closed to international adoptions. And yeah, there are currently 10 countries that are closed to international adoptions and 2 that are suspended. The things that influence these countries are the role of culture, the corruption in the adoption process, human trafficking, politics, nationalism, and not being able to meet the requirements of The Hague. Adoptees were found to not seek out their birth families as much as researchers predicted. Factors that helped determine if international adoptees would seek out their birth families were to answer biological questions about themselves, coping with a big life event, and the adoptee wishing to have a relationship with the birth family. So, what can future research do? They could take this information that's presented here to further their own research. They could look at the extent to which openness in adoption, problem behaviors, and low self-esteem can lead an international adoptee to seek out their birth family. And the importance of culture in the adoptee's life should also be looked into, especially since it's becoming more and more of a big deal. So it's really important to know as much as we can about it. With international adoption surpassing domestic adoption in numbers, it is very important to know as much as we can about it as possible. And knowing as much as we can help better prepare the adoption triad for the road ahead, just so they can know what to expect or what to not expect. Alright, well that's my presentation. Thank you very much.